Thank you, everyone. Hopefully you can hear me okay. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Leah Meicher. I'm the Assistant Director of Student Enterprise Applications in the Registrar's office, and I will be moderating the session today. Just a reminder, whether you're online or in person, we will be taking your questions through Zoom chat. And I believe, do we have a QR code for this? But I do have a set of questions for Provost Isbell that we'll take care of first. So welcome and thank you for being able to join us, Provost Isbell. We're all excited to get to know you today. Let's see. How about the first question? Now that you've had a couple months under your belt here at UW-Madison, what are your first impressions? Any surprises?
Winter is a very big one. So first, let me just thank you so much for welcoming me. I'm very happy to be here. As Lois said, I spent many years as a professor and associate dean, sitting in the middle of TSO, which is Technology Services Organization in the college. It was one of the first things that I did when I was an undergrad. And so you are my people. So I'm very much excited to have this conversation. And although there are a couple of questions that we're going to start with, my hope is that we will have an actual conversation. You'll ask me whatever you want to do, be as wide-ranging as you want. If you ask me something I can't answer, I just won't answer it. But otherwise, I will tell you the truth. So the social contract that I'm proposing is that you will ask interesting questions. I will try my best to give interesting answers, and we'll have a conversation over the next 45 minutes. That seem reasonable to everyone? Okay, so we're going to get started, but I'm expecting something of a conversation, something interesting to happen. So what surprised me other than the winter, which is a real thing, by the way. I spent most of my career in Atlanta, and I was just thinking that past November and first week of December is more snow than I have seen in any place that I've lived for over a quarter century. I am told that it will keep happening over the next several months. I intend to remain in denial about that. So if you ask me anything about it, I'm just going to pretend it's not happening. And if one more person mentions layers to me, I'm going to scream. So please do not do that. Otherwise, so I think I'm sort of surprised by a kind of an inherent contradiction about this place, which I find kind of interesting. So I should preface all of my remarks by saying that this is an amazing university. It's an amazing ecosystem outside the university itself. I sort of knew that coming in, but it's much broader and deeper than I actually expected or what it looked like from the outside. So this is really an amazing place. So at Georgia Tech, I was at a premier flagship, but it was very STEM focused. MIT was broader, but it was mostly the same thing. This is the first time I've been at a land grant. We've got 4 medical schools of various sorts, or health sciences schools. Have a school of education, which has 3 arts departments in it. Right? It's a very broad and kind of it's a very broad and sort of interesting place. So the biggest sort of surprise to me was that breadth really does kind of live sort of through everything, which I think is kind of interesting. But the sort of inherent contradiction is these sort of two things that are happening at the same time that are in an interesting tension. So I've spent a lot of time traveling around the country and mostly lived in most places. It's the first time that I've actually spent a lot of time in the Midwest. I will say, and I mean this with all generosity and in no way, in any way that is negative, but there's a kind of passive aggressive politeness about the place that I find entertaining to sort of participate in. Sort of conflicts with the way I was raised and the sort of things I deal with. And so this sort of interesting tension is this sort of amazing desire for impact and change, and to figure out how to take something like the Wisconsin idea and really see it expressed out in the community and out in the world, and to do whatever it takes to make that happen, no matter what you do and no matter where you come from or how you're a part of the place, on the one hand, but also a kind of suspicion around change at the same time. I think the expression that I've heard the most in the last 4 months I've been here is, but that's the way we've always done it. And that kind of tension, I think, is kind of interesting. It's a sort of an interesting place to figure out how to do more while still remaining who you are at heart, what your core values are, and sort of appreciating that while understanding how it fits into where it is you want to go over the next several years. So I think that's the thing that sort of surprised me the most, all that promise and all that kind of tension of trying to figure out how to get from here to there.
Yeah, I mean, this certainly is a campus that's deeply rooted in our traditions, but we are pretty progressive with a lot of things. So glad you were able to see stuff beyond the snow and the winter.
We'll see.
So this is a conference about leadership and information and technology, topics you seem very well acquainted with. How would you describe your leadership style?
So it's an interesting question. It's hard, right? So I was talking to Lois about this not too long ago, and it's interesting, right? There's what I think I do and how I'm perceived and how I do things, and then there's sort of everyone else in the world, and it's sort of unclear whether we agree with one another, right? There's actually the head of IT once gave me a little sticker based on a story that we had, and that I told him, and it's kind of a philosophical question. If the entire universe tells you that you're a potato and you disagree, are they wrong or are you an insane potato? And so he had custom made this little sticker, which is, am I an insane potato? Which I keep with me right under one of my 4 monitors on my desk that I look at every once in a while to try to remind myself, am I an insane potato? I think what I think my leadership style is, one, I like to think I'm a sane potato, but I think beyond that, I really think about things in terms of change. So we started out this conversation, sort of tension between, I think of myself as a change agent as opposed to someone who is, I don't know, just kind of keeping things moving along and trying to understand what that is, what that has to look like in the place that I am. I think if you're going to be that kind of person, if you're trying to do leadership that way, if you're trying to bring people along, then it helps very much to have and to constantly talk about what it is, the core thing that you're trying to do and what your core values are. So I like to think of my style as being, insofar as it's a style, as trying to bring as many people along into these conversations, create a space for people to talk honestly about what they're thinking, but to always make certain that we understand where it is we're going and why. So I'm going to give you an example of this. So some of you will have heard me say this, and that's good because I'm going to keep saying it, and I want as many people to hear it as possible. If you haven't already, you'll be hearing a lot of initiatives that we'll be doing. Some of you will have heard of the big faculty hiring, interdisciplinary hiring initiative that we're embarking on. It's more than just faculty, but that's what we're calling it because it spells out FISH, and that's an acronym, and I like acronyms. But there's also been discussions about changes around the budget model. We're moving to something that looks more like RCM, but it's not, because nothing's purely RCM. It's, for those of you know what that means, but kind of going that way. There's some interesting discussions around the way that we do capital planning. Just yesterday, we did the last stages of changing the vice chancellor for research and graduate education into a vice chancellor for research, who will be focusing on these big outward-facing research things and all the implications, including for people in this room, that implies. And so we're going to have lots of these kinds of conversations and initiatives. But the truth is, we are only doing one thing. No matter how many things you hear about, no matter what sort of little things here or there, you see yourself in them or you don't see yourself in them, we are doing only one thing. The one thing that we're doing is we're trying to take this wonderful university, which is like an aircraft carrier, and we're trying to move it from here to here. Right? We're trying to take the fundamental notion of what the Wisconsin ID is. What does it mean to be the elite public research university of the middle of the 21st century? What does it mean to take these things that we knew how to do 175 years ago and translate them into 25, 30, 75 years into the future? What do we have to change? What do we have to keep the same? What do we have to make happen in order to maintain that? I mean, my fundamental belief is that we are at a great place and we want every single political, social, and technological decision in the world to involve us. Because why not? It'll either be the people in this room, it'll be faculty and staff and students and alum or friends, but there will be no conversation of any import in the world that doesn't somehow be able to trace its way back to Wisconsin-Madison. So we're going to do that. What does that mean? Well, it means that we have to think big, right? We have to think about big problems that we're going to solve, which is why we're going to have this huge interdisciplinary hiring initiative where we're adding 125, 150 folks more than we would have anyway, because we would have done this anyway, and focus them across all the colleges. I prefer to say colleges versus schools and colleges. It's too many words. So across all of those, how are we going to make that work? Well, if we're going to do that, we're going to have to create incentives, right? But to do incentives, we've got to rethink the way the budget model works. But if we're going to do that, there's all this infrastructure and all these implications about how everything touches together and moves across the sort of silos that we've had. So we have to rethink the way we do research. We have to rethink the way we do academics. We're going to see more interdisciplinary programs. All of these things follow naturally from a very simple idea that there's this one thing that we want to do. And so to me, a question of leadership style is really a question of what is it you're trying to accomplish and how do you try to communicate that and bring people in to the conversation. And for me, what gets me up in the morning and what I hope gets the people around me up in the morning is the idea that all these little things that we're doing, which somehow seem disconnected, are actually fundamentally the same thing. We understand that what it is. And so whenever there's a decision to be made in front of us, we can simply ask, does it connect to the central thing that we're trying to do, or is it irrelevant? And the answer to that question tells us what we do and tells us whether it's worth doing. So that's the way I try to think about leadership. That's the way I try to think about what it means to bring together amazing people you're working with, as opposed to simply supervising, to get from here to there, wherever there is.
That's a great perspective. So as provost, you have insight into both the academic and administrative functions of the university. How have you seen technology shape the student experience and faculty research over the years? What gets you most excited about future possibilities?
So I think that's an interesting question because it has a bunch of premises sort of built into it. So let's sort of unpack it a little bit. I think that there's the question of, okay, how has technology affected us? I mean, how many people online? 200, something like that. There are more people online than there are in this room. That wasn't possible in any meaningful way 25 years ago, even 10 or 15 years ago. At some point, everything would have broken down multiple times by now. You know, the network would have gone down a bit. So just that alone changes everything, right? We can bring people together and we can think about things like what a campus looks like across both time and space, which is not a way of kind of thinking about the world that even made sense, you know, an academic generation ago. So it's changed everything, right? Including the need to have plugs everywhere so people can have their devices going at all times. Like everything has sort of changed. So, you know, obviously it's changed everything, but it changes things in ways that I don't think are necessarily obvious. Point one I want to make. And two, it changes it for different people, which is also a thing that I think is worth missing. So how many people are familiar with Amara's Law? Anybody know what I'm talking about, Amara's Law? So a couple of people do. So Amara's Law is my favorite. So what do you think Amara, tell me what Amara's Law is. Amara, not Moore's Law. Okay, let's do it. Anyone know what Amara's Law is? Okay, so here's Amara's Law. Amara's Law says that we always overestimate the short-term impact of technology and underestimate its long-term impact. That's Amara's Law. I think that's amazing, and I think it's true, and I think all of you could easily imagine ways in which that has happened. So we go back to the, I don't know, you know, ARPANET or something, and we think about what that looked like in the 60s and 70s, and people were predicting all these things that would happen, or even take us to the World Wide Web, so in the early 90s, oh, it's gonna change everything. And it kind of didn't. I mean, we got blinking web pages, which were terrible, but you know, we got past that, and you know, CSS and all this other stuff, and we went to Web 2.0, and people talked about these things, and you know, it didn't have the immediate impact that people thought it was gonna have. On the other hand, it's changed every single thing about our lives, right? People were talking about what was going to happen in 1993, but nobody saw Twitter coming. We might have done something. Nobody saw Twitter coming, right? Nobody saw Facebook. No one even saw Google, right? No one saw any of that happening. And that's changed everything, including almost certainly the outcome of multiple elections around the world, the way that we connect with one another, both positive ways and the negative ways where we somehow are more connected and more isolated at the same time. Like massive changes in the kind of questions that we ask and our ability to connect with one another for both good or ill. So of course, technology's changed everything. And if we think about it at that time scale, then it changed everything about the way education works. It's everything about not just your everyday lives, but just the way that we interact with one another. But it's had a different and differential effect on different kinds of constituencies. So I think the students, having grown up like this, have absorbed all of this stuff, and it's changed not necessarily the way they receive education, but the way that they interact with one another and they think about the purpose of education in their lives. This was made worse by the pandemic, but this has been going on for a very long time. And those are the rest of us who are older, who may understand technology or not, have yet to catch up with any of this. So I'll give you a little kind of statistic when we talk about education and the way it's affected things. So you've all heard of Chegg, and you've heard of Course Hero and those kinds of things, right? I have a friend of mine who worked on this stuff that I did at Georgia Tech, where we built this online master's program, which was also a thing that wasn't possible 20 years ago. And he did a lot of analysis, and So it turns out that those cheating sites, which is what they are, let's be frank, are more popular than pornography sites, which if you consider the demographics, amazing, right? So once you realize that, it means everything about the way they interact with information and what they think education is and how it is they sort of view themselves in relationship to all of us is incredibly different from what it was when at least I was going to college, which was shortly after fire was invented. I don't know what the average age is here, but almost none of us have gone through this experience the way that they as natives have gone through this experience. On the other side, it's changed the way that we as people who do education or support education or do research or support research interact with each other and interact particularly with the sort of educational ecosystem. We expect more. We suddenly have data that we've never thought about. We have compute we've never thought about. We have new ways of imagining a future, even rethinking what science actually means fundamentally that's sort of being thrown at us. We have access to information in a way that we've never had before, and that's not an unalloyed good. I mean, as a simple thing, it used to be in 1983, you had an idea, you went to the library, you knew it was an original idea, and then you went and you published something. But now you have an idea, you Google it, and there's like 17,000 people who had pretty much that idea, and you don't know what to do with it. And that causes all kinds of interesting side effects to the way that you think about the way that you do research. The same is true for the way that you do education. So I think for the sort of producers of it, it's had a kind of different world. It's sort of different from what the consumers have experienced. And then we haven't talked about administration and all of the issues that come with worrying about cybersecurity and connections and, whether we violated FERPA accidentally. It's changed everything. On the other hand, it hasn't changed anything at all. We have not adapted to the potentials of the technology that we have in front of us to rethink the way that we fundamentally should be doing education. Maybe we can talk about that a little bit later.
Probably along the same lines then, you've spent much of your career researching machine learning and artificial intelligence with emphasis on developing adaptive technologies for human-machine collaboration. What opportunities and challenges do you see AI presenting for higher ed institutions in the future?
It will, again, it changes everything and nothing all at once. I think so if we don't use magic words like machine learning and AI, which I've been doing for decades, and we just think about it as computing and data, then the fact that everyone has access to all that compute and all that data impacts everything that we do. I think that the biggest difference, so the story that I like to tell about this, or I like to think about this, is that calling it AI and machine learning, which again is a thing that I do, and of course I think is the single most important thing in the world, it's just computing, right? It's just networking and computing. And when you ask questions about how AI or machine learning matters or what it does, you're really just asking, do computers matter? And the answer is clearly yes. Does networking matter? The answer is clearly yes. But I think that what we see that's different with machine learning and AI is that we have moved from a kind of difference in degree to a difference in kind. And there's a couple of ways to come at it. I guess the way I would think about it is it's around the way you think about the world. So it helps if you kind of think about what computing is, right? So I think of computing, machine learning, AI, all these things as a different discipline, right? It's not engineering. It's not science. It's not history. It's not philosophy, but of course it's pieces of all of these things. So if you were to ask, what is a way of thinking as a computationalist? I think the answer is kind of straightforward. It's the fundamental idea that models, languages, and machines are equivalent. And this is something we didn't understand or have a language to talk about in 1955. But we do now. Just fundamentally, those three things are the same, right? And the implications of that are really significant, right? Because mathematicians, a result in mathematics is a theorem, right? But a theorem is supposed to represent truth given some underlying set of axioms, but that's static. But computing is fundamentally dynamic and self-executing. And that way of thinking about it is very different from the way the mathematician tended to think about the world. Dynamic programming is a different view of the universe. It's, of course, an argument that you are making, which is why it looks like philosophy. It represents artificial things that you're building. So it looks like engineering where you're trying to build some demonstrably superior technology. On the other hand, It's science because it represents fundamental information limits of the universe, for example. And so it's discovery. So it's all of these pieces, but the fact that those pieces come together in a particular way is what makes computing interesting. So what makes machine learning and AI interesting? Well, what's changed is in that little triangle of models, languages, and machines, you now have a person in the middle of it. That person is generating data. It's data about ourselves. And that data changes fundamentally who we are. When you do computer science or you do or data science or whatever, fundamentally you start thinking about the algorithm, and the algorithm is king. But in machine learning and AI, the algorithm is not king. The data are king. And the algorithm matters less than the data does, or data do. And that way of thinking kind of changes or should change the way that we attack problems, whether at a kind of administrative level, or we're talking about education or research, or even we're just talking about bringing people into the everyday conversation. Scale has gotten too big, too fast. It's literally exponential. I mean that in the technical sense, not the colloquial sense. And so it puts us in an interesting situation where our problems are changing exponentially. All of our solutions are linear, and that never works. I don't even know if I answered your question. Anyway, I started thinking about triangles and human beings, and so I might have lost the thread. Sorry about that. But
Okay. I'll just stick to the script.
it's fine.
So I'm at the last question. Many of us in the audience, including me, are just beginning their leadership journeys at UW-Madison. What advice would you give to someone in the first half of their higher ed IT career who is interested in exploring leadership opportunities at the university? And then I kind of want to add on, all this talk about computationalists and AI and machine language. Could you speak to the extent of trying to cultivate the responsibility and the integrity that we all need to remember? I mean, when I got started as a programmer, I was scared to death of writing my first for loop. And now with the way technology is today, how can we lead folks into being more responsible and maintain the integrity of the data and the computing that we're doing?
So it's interesting you asked that question, because your second part of the question kind of answers the first, right? So the main thing you have to do, I think, if you want to go down, thinking about leadership and what that means, you have to figure out who you are, what really matters to you, what your North Star is, what kind of person are you, how do you want to lead, as sort of a fundamentally basic idea. Why are you doing this at all, right? So people will ask me, oh, no, one day do you want to be a this or do you want to be a that? And the answer is no. What I want to do, what I believe, me personally, is I think that higher education is in the middle of a massive crisis. With respect to the body politic, with the way that it thinks about itself. We're going through massive demographic shifts. Everything is different. And we have a model that is hundreds of years old, that it has not adapted to neither the present nor the future that's clearly coming. And there are a small number of universities that are positioned to do something about that. And I want to be at a place like that, and I want to be in the room and help to lead the conversation. Now, if that means being provost of a land-grant university with 50,000 students and 32 direct reports, which now I have 33 direct reports, sure, that's the right thing to do. If it means going over here in a room and doing something different around HR, then that's fine too. However did you get from here to there, but that is the reason why I kind of want to do what I want to do. So having a vision of yourself, understanding why it is you're going down this path and where it ultimately could lead you as a result is, I think, the very first thing you have to do. Why am I doing this at all? You're talking about, and what I sensed in the second part of your question is, dare I say, a passion around certain notions of responsibility and what are we doing with this technology and what does it mean? That could be a part of your North Star. You have to kind of figure, this is what I care about. This is the thing that matters. This is the thing that I might be able to impact and affect, right? And I think that kind of question, why would I do this? Why would I trade off being down and doing the things that I enjoy, whether it's programming or building systems? Why would I trade that off for being further and further away from the problems themselves, but in a place where I can affect more and more human beings so that they can solve these problems? Why would I make that trade-off? You have to have a reason to do it besides the next title or the next bump in pay, because that just doesn't get you through the difficult times. It has to be There's a big red circle up there, and that's where I'm heading. And I'm going to keep walking towards that circle, and you just have to figure out what that red circle is. On the responsibility question, it happens to be a thing I really, really care about. But rather than that, I'm going to give someone else an opportunity to ask me a question about how badly things can go if you aren't thoughtful and responsible, and why it's a failure of leadership. So now someone will have to ask me that question in the next 20 minutes.
All right. And with that, I think we can open it up to questions we received through the chat. All right. First question I see is from Alan. What do you see as the most promising opportunities for IT to support change at UW-Madison?
I mean, that's an interesting question. So you can think about it in terms of as purely as a kind of infrastructural question. Or you can think about it as a sort of educational question. So let's try and do both of them. So I think in terms of infrastructure, fundamentally, the engine that drives all the innovation that's coming out of the university is going to be IT. Because fundamentally, there's no way around this. It's as important as the utilities. It's as important as the fact that heat's on in this building. It's as important as I'm going to try to do something that makes sense to Wisconsin as plowing the snow. That's a thing that happens here, right? I don't want to get over my skis. That's another thing I've learned to say since I've been here in the last 4 months. So it purely is a matter of infrastructure. Nothing can work without. But I think, and that's important, and we should all remember this, but there's also a question of kind of innovation and expertise. So I think the real opportunity here, whether it's educational, it's supporting research, or just the everyday business needs of the university, is understanding how to take the expertise that you have, because you have this expertise that most people do not, and making certain that that people are making decisions that take into account both the promises and the threats of the proper use or misuse of technology in the everyday of what they're doing. Because people don't think about that. They don't understand. You have people who are making policy decisions fundamentally who don't actually get the consequences of shoving this piece of technology in or not doing this thing right or wrong. And then figuring out as individual people who are helping to lead those discussions, how to get people from here to there. Because we all know, for example, what you need to do to be secure, but you're not going to get most people to do that. You're not even going to get me to do that. I know better. If you're not putting anything on my phone, it's not happening. It's not happening. So how do you get me to behave still in the right way so that the place is safe, you've done all the things you're supposed to do, and you're compliant with whatever the requirements are? So for me, the opportunities here are less about getting the particular piece of technology in and getting it working, although that is a necessary but not sufficient condition. It's being a part of the conversations and making yourself a part of the conversation so that people can make reasonable decisions given the reality of where the technology is and where the technology is going to be. That's where the kind of innovation lies. That's where I think the opportunity of changing the direction of the place actually comes from.
All right, next question from Nicole. How do you envision balancing the dichotomy of academic freedom with streamlined and centralized information technology infrastructure?
I'm not quite sure what that means. Read that again.
How do you envision balancing the dichotomy of academic freedom with streamlined and centralized information technology infrastructure?
I'm not sure I see the tension exactly. So I could imagine, I mean, yeah, I'm not sure I understand the question. Is this a question about whether that information wants to be free and we're creating structures that make that less possible? Or is it around control, central control around a particular place that makes it difficult for people to do what they want to do? I can think of lots of ways that could go. I don't know why I'm looking at you. Yeah.
I'll elaborate. I'm Tamara Walker. I'm the Director of Academic Technology with Do It, and I'll elaborate a little bit. I think what Nicole might be getting at is we often hear as a faculty member, for example, are going to use this technology or this data belongs to us because of academic freedom versus we'd like to use the central, or we are going to use the central IT services because that's not meeting our research needs, for example, or just not a tool that we want to use. We prefer to use Dropbox over Box. Thank you. So how do we, manage that tension? Because we do have concerns as IT about the data that is going into Dropbox that's not protected by university legal policy, IT policy, et cetera.
Right. So, okay. So that makes sense. I still have my Dropbox license from Georgia Tech. Thank you very much. And the fact that, every time you use Google something or another, Google owns all your data, and getting people to understand that and what that means is actually quite difficult. I think it is extremely difficult question. The real answer is you've got a distributed bunch of users who know what they want or think they do, and they want it to be exactly the way that it was, whenever that is they learned how to do it. And the only way around it, because you can't win by sort of legislating it away. You can't just demand you have to do this. The only really way to make it work is to make it so that it becomes obvious to them that the tools that they want and that they want to have or think they want to have are available by these other mechanisms, and making it transparent for them. The way that works in practice is you get their grad students to do it, and the faculty follow. You get their TAs to adopt the new LMS and follows, right? You get the new people who are coming in who are sort of learning, and then they end up dragging, all the old people along. And on the edges, you have legitimate cases where people need to do the thing that they need to do, and it can't be handled by whatever the thing is that you think is safest and is most this, that, and the other. And so you just help them. You help them say, look, the goal isn't to say no. The goal is to get to yes. What is it you really want? You can have this. We're going to have to do this. How much it's going to cost you, but we can sort of make it work. And if people believe that you're actually trying to work with them as opposed to you being the enemy, you can often kind of get them to come along over time. And that's really the only thing you can do in a distributed environment like this. Now, every once in a while, you just have to do something by fiat. But that is rarely the case for the kinds of difficult cases that I think you're bringing up. But it can be done. It just takes time. You got me to use, two-factor authentication, which I was absolutely against. Not because it wasn't better. I know it was better. Just didn't want to do it. But then it turns out it's on my watch. And that was all it took. Once it became easy for me and I understood it, I was willing to do it. And I think that's true for a lot of people. Thank you for that. I appreciate it.
All right. Building off your comments on the Faculty Strategic Hiring Initiative, it would be great to hear how you plan to include the many shared governance groups on campus.
Well, so it's an interesting, so there's two different ways to think about sort of shared governance. The way I tend to think about shared governance is it's bringing as many people along into the conversations at the places where it makes the most sense, right? So without naming specific processes, I will point out that there are a lot of groups that take votes on things, and the votes that they take kind of don't matter, because all the hard work has already been done up to that point. You guys have all been in this situation where, you have an advisory group or something, and you already know what the answer has to be because you've already gotten there. You've got until 4 p.m. this afternoon to sign the agreement with IBM or whatever. So it doesn't matter what the vote is. It's what it is, right? The real way to get shared governance in is in the places where they have the expertise and the knowledge, and where they see things that won't necessarily be seen by some person over here, and to get them engaged in those conversations. So the way that works in this situation is you work through the places where you sort of aggregated the most resources and the most risk. So for the hiring initiative, that's at the level of the deans, because the goal here is not to create a process by which a bunch of people are going to independently hire folks. It's to come up with a conversation that we can have over multiple years, where you can figure out the big things that you can do across multiple colleges, multiple departments, multiple disciplines that are going to have an impact on some big problem. So you want to think about something like the application of AI to human interaction, or you want to think about sustainability and what does that look like for the next several decades in building resilience, right? That involves lawyers, it involves policy people, it involves various scientists, whether they're material scientists, it involves engineers, it involves computing people, it involves all of these people. And you've got to find a mechanism by which you can get people to figure out how to enable those conversations along the way. You'll notice that when I talk about this, when I talk to the deans talk to their chairs and their associate deans and the faculty in their departments, and they have these kinds of ongoing conversations distributed across this university. I never actually said anything about shared governance. I'm talking about the shared constituency of all the people who are involved, right? Which is different from, so sometimes when people say shared governance, they mean all the people, whether they're academic staff, university staff, faculty, or students. Sometimes they mean this specific committee. When I'm talking about it, I mean all the people getting engaged in the conversation. So by the way, it's couched as a faculty interdisciplinary strategic hiring initiative. fishy. But actually that implies that if you're gonna hire 60 people in an area across multiple disciplines, then you have to start thinking very carefully about what does it actually look like to put those people together and enable them to succeed, which means maybe you need a center. You're going to be building all of these, you're going to need research scientists, it's going to have an impact on the way that you teach these new grad students you're going to be raising over the next 3 or 4 years, which probably has an impact on the kind of degrees that you have. So all of those conversations are going to involve all of these people over multiple years to figure out what the implications of this is going to be. That's where the sort of shared conversation has to happen. And in terms of the kind of process of it, nothing's changing about the hiring process. Right? Nothing's changing. People are still being hired at the individual units. They're doing all of these things, all the governance that goes into that, all the process that goes into that. Absolutely nothing is changing. What is different is that we're asking people at this leadership level, the deans, to figure out how to have a conversation with their various constituencies at a level that is not just about their individual units, but crosses multiple units. And that ultimately ends up involving everybody, not necessarily next Thursday, but the week after that, the month after that, the year after that, because this is, you're not going to hire 150 people tomorrow and be done with it, right? This is going to take years and it's going to change, and people are going to come in and they're going to see new things, including people we haven't hired yet. They're going to come in and they're going to be a part of this ongoing conversation. So I expect that everyone who's interested in being involved in this is going to be involved with it. Because I certainly hope so.
All right. Sarah says, I love your work is involved with change. I love your work is involved with changing how the giant university can move in subtle ways moving forward. I also wonder about the inherent distrust of everything we experience online in a social capacity can influence how we engage with positive technology movements. Do you find the acceptance of technological change to be a difficult struggle, or do your audiences seem excited to make technological change?
I think they all seem excited to make technological change, right? I mean, as you know, people are always interested in change and they want it to happen right up until the point it affects them, right? And I think, so you get a lot of sort of initial, yes, this is good, I can see where this is going to go. I don't see a lot of fear, particularly in an environment like this one. I do see a lot of, and this gets to the earlier question, of sort of resistance to the particular way that I do things. I need to be able to do the things that I do now, exactly the way that I'm doing them, but better and faster. But I think the technology itself doesn't, particularly at a place like this, doesn't particularly worry people. Not directly. There's all these indirect implications, like, oh, suddenly there's an increase in, I don't know, computing, computer science, and therefore it's going to have an impact on the number of people who become English majors or whatever, pick whatever your favorite major is. And people worry about things like that. But I think the actual technology itself, they divorce from that reality. They divorce from that possibility. So I'm very optimistic that as new technology comes in, people will adopt it. And by the way, not just adopt it, but adapt it to the ways in which they do things. So I am not concerned about that at all.
Okay, next question is from Andrew. Along with what you have shared about fostering interdisciplinarity, and with regard to the recent Daily Cardinal story about UW President Rothman's email about humanities/non-STEM programs, can you share some of your thoughts around the role of non-technical disciplines or their relationships to IT?
So I don't know about this letter, but I think I still understand the question. So I did my undergraduate degree in information and computer science at Georgia Tech. I minored in history, Spanish, and cognitive science. So I'm hola, ¿cómo está? I am very much a believer in the integration of all aspects of education into what we do. So I don't, like, as I said earlier with the interdisciplinary hiring, well, we're going to solve this problem. We need lawyers, right? By the way, and I said this about the models, languages, and machines being equivalent. I mean, just to be very clear about this, it's a way of thinking, right? The engineers have a way of thinking. Humanists have a way of thinking. Philosophers are very good at making an argument, which is a different way of thinking, right? So education, and particularly in an environment like this, is about getting people to think differently, right? You've heard this before, right? You're way down here when you're thinking about tool sets. Oh, IT is a tool that I'm going to use. I'm going to use Git or something. And then you start moving to skill sets, but you don't actually make the transition you want to make until you start thinking about mindsets, right? So to me, it's not possible to solve the kind of problems we want to solve or to think about the things we want to think unless we bring together lots of different mindsets, and in particular, expose the people who are building the technology into thinking about that. The mistake that many of us make, including I suspect people in this room make, is we try our best, and there are good reasons for this, to think about the problem as being here. We don't worry about what came before, and we don't worry about what's going to happen after. We worry about this problem here. That makes things easy to think about, but it breaks everything fundamentally at the end. So you've got to have this kind of broad notion with people with different ways of thinking coming together to solve your problem, or otherwise it all sort of breaks down. So I think it must be the case that everyone who is building the technology of the future, taking the technologies out there and connecting with the stuff that we do, have to have a broad kind of education in order to understand what the implications are. And I think that the people who are not building the technology but are using that technology have to be able to understand how to think like a technologist in order to understand the implications of the systems that they are engaging. And there's no way around it. I will give you an example. I will pretend that I was asked the question about responsibility to give you an example of how this sort of works. So this is a thing that actually happened a year or two ago. So there was a system that was built, and I think this really kind of applies to this. And by the way, although this is a story about technology and machine learning and AI, it's actually a story about leadership. Okay, so there was this system that was built out of Duke University. It's very cool. This was in the beginning of sort of the generative AI thing we're into now. Some of you will remember this. Some of you will heard me talk about this before. It's an actual a system that would take low-res corrupted images and create high-res images out of them. Right? So because why not? I mean, that sounds kind of cool, right? You create information where information didn't exist before. That's kind of neat. So the use case of it, the kind of demo of this was you take an image of a person, you downsample it, so it's this little blocky thing, and then you would run it through this system, generative AI system, and then it would generate this high resolution image, and it would be amazing. And it worked really well, got papers published, everyone thought it was really cool. And it was cool. And so then they released it out into the wild, you know, because that's what we do with technology when we create it. And it was fun. So it got out in the world to some acclaim. And some people started playing with it. And someone said, hey, why don't we run some celebrities through? So by the time I get involved in this story, the celebrity that was run through it was Barack Obama. So you take a picture of Barack Obama, you downsample it, and then you generate a new picture of Barack Obama. And do you know what it did? It turned Barack Obama into what every single person in this room would recognize as a white man. Well, that was interesting. Then they started running, I think AOC was the next one that I saw. It turned her into a white woman. And someone's like, I see a pattern. So then what they did is they started running all of these more dark-skinned celebrities through the system, and it reliably and consistently turned them into white people. By the way, it would make women smile. I love this. Every time I tell this story, I get exactly that reaction. All of them go, right, so that's exactly right. So that's interesting, right? So they started doing this, and people, started to get upset. Then it came this whole discussion about, what was the problem here? And people would say things like, it's just clearly a data problem. So I'm a well-known machine learning person. I'm telling you this one because I want you to know I'm a well-known machine learning person, but also why it is I ended up getting sucked into this. So someone took a picture of me and ran it through the system, and you can kind of see it. This is a picture right there. As you can see, it took a picture of me and it gave me blonde hair and turned me into what anyone would recognize as a white male. It also added 40 pounds, which is the thing that pissed me off the most, but whatever. Interesting to note, by the way, the skin color is exactly the same, but it's just so clear that this is now coded as a white male. So that went on for a little while. We got into a big technical argument about this. I got pulled into a discussion with my good friend Jan LeCun. Some of you will know him as Turing Award winner and is the leader of Facebook's AI efforts. And the argument was about data. And so if you had just trained it on people from Senegal, then it would have worked, it would work. And so someone actually said, well, let's run that experiment. So they trained the system on just people from Senegal. And you know what? It didn't work at all. It's not just that it turned white people into black people. It didn't work, period, right? Which is interesting. And why is that? Well, it turns out all those hyperparameters, lambda equals this and gamma equals that. It turns out they were just set and they were optimized for the set of data that people were actually playing around with at the time, and didn't work outside of that. No one knew how to make it work. Kind of neat, right? I mean, it's a technical question. That's kind of interesting. unsurprising, actually, if you think about it. How many of you know about the history of cameras? So cameras are really interesting, right? So cameras were, we started taking pictures, I don't know, 100 something years ago, probably this same day the university was founded, I don't know, a long time ago. And in the beginning, well, it's an engineering problem, right? You can't take all possible lights, plus there's this chemical process with film. So they optimized it because it's an engineering problem. They optimized it for people with pale skin against contrasting backgrounds. So early cameras and filming, period, just didn't work on brown skinned people at all. Made muddy, and just didn't work. Now, the arguments that you would have heard at the time was, well, that's just physics, blah, blah, blah. No, it was a conscious decision to optimize over the set of people they were going to optimize on. In fact, do you know when cameras got really good at taking pictures of brown-skinned people? When furniture companies complained that they couldn't make ads of mahogany furniture, and when candy companies complained that they couldn't make ads for chocolate. And then our good friends at Kodak and Panasonic and other such places said, maybe we could fix this. And they did. They found a way to do that. It turns out enough money injects enough energy in the system and you start doing these kind of things. So it's not surprising, right? These are choices people made and they didn't think about it, right? This was not like a conscious thing to do it. Well, it may have been semi-conscious in that you had to pick the parameters, but this is just a thing that people did and it had all of this effect. So it turns out that the technical problem was actually quite difficult. You had to come up with new ways of sort of thinking about it and people worked on it and it wasn't that big of a deal. But the question you might ask yourself, and this is where it becomes a leadership question, is how did this happen in the first place? How did it not occur to anybody before they released something to 8 billion people, including people who spend all their time on the internet trolling, to test this out? Well, you know why. Because of the set of people who happen to be in the room. And I think more importantly, the set of people who weren't in the room. So people often talk about, when they talk about diversity, for example, about invisibility. And invisibility is often expressed as you're in front of me and I don't see you. But this is not actually where we get into trouble. The invisibility that gets us into trouble is you're not in the room and I don't notice your absence. So the set of people who needed to have been in the room, who I would have said immediately, why don't we test this on, Aretha Franklin, just weren't in the room. And so the question never got asked and no one noticed until it was too late. So it's a leadership question to me, what does it mean as you kind of go forward and you're trying to get people to work on big things, whether they're technical or not, is you have to find ways to bring the right set of people in the room and to always be aware of who isn't in the room that you forgot about, who would drive the set of questions that would lead to a better piece of technology. Staying here and ignoring everything that came before and everything that goes after is guaranteed to get you embarrassed. It's guaranteed to make things not just kind of silly, but to build systems that will actively harm people. And nobody wants to be a part of that. So the leadership question is a question of fundamentally about responsibility. People will often frame it as ethics or what, but it's not an ethical, it is, but really it's a responsibility question and fundamentally it's a leadership question. What does it mean for you to think about how you're going to build a system that's going to be touched by 8 billion people and is going to have to go to places you've never really conceived of? How do you minimize the danger that comes from that? How do you bring people into the room to have the conversation and have the difficult conversations that are going to happen as you bring people from very different backgrounds together to work on a problem, have completely different views of what's good, bad, or indifferent?
All right. It looks like we're
This is the international symbol. Also, she actually mouthed while she was saying. So I think you want me to wrap it up. So we will wrap.
all right. Yeah, we are out of time. Thank you for carving time out of your busy schedule to meet with us. I want to say you managed to dodge a question about your music video, so we'll all just have to Google it.
Oh my God, there are several music videos out there. By the way, CS Ed Week or CS Ed Week is next week or week after. There will be a release of a bunch of videos called Weird Computer Science, which I co-star in. So watch those instead of the music video with me singing. Version of Smoking Out the Window. Don't look that up.
It's very entertaining. Thank you very much. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate it. Y'all have a wonderful day.